You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
This is the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator, and it's your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, and today my guest is Mark Falzone. He is the CEO of Scenic America, which is an organization that is working to help us be more scenic in many ways. They help us think about how we can bury utilities and keep our roads clean and beautiful, and a host of other things, responsible redevelopment, to keep our nation beautiful. And Mark, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Art. It's a real honor to be on here, and looking forward to our chat together. And thank you for doing this podcast. I think it's a great service for our country.
Thank you. Well, Mark, you know, I looked at your bio and can't help but appreciate the number of stops that you've had over the years that involve community service and moving our nation forward. Talk about what got you so interested in both public service from a government standpoint and also from now a nonprofit standpoint.
Oh, geez, Art, we're going into like childhood stories now here. So,
okay, good.
It's funny you say that because, I was talking to somebody the other day, and one of the things I'm really proud of with my career is that, I've really had a career dedicated to public service. So that's something that's really does, it's something I'm really proud of, and it's as part of who I am. So I remember, as a real small kid growing up in Massachusetts, whenever somebody would ask you, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up? My sort of mother had me brainwashed that I wanted to be a doctor. Like every good mother wants their, daughters and sons to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, right? And so one day I was in the 5th grade and somebody asked me the question, oh, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, oh, I want to be a doctor. And then I sort of paused and I went, no, I actually want to be in politics. I want to be a politician. So that's sort of and that's sort of changed the trajectory of my life early on in the 5th grade, and knew that what I love about politics is that you have the chance to help millions of people at all at once with like policy changes or things like that. And even if not millions, thousands of people. But you have the ability to have like massive change that can really help people's quality of life and really help people, with how they're doing. And although, not necessarily, especially like the higher you get in government, at the federal level, people aren't usually like, oh, my life changed because of that policy. But that's okay, because for me, it's about me knowing, not about like, getting the thanks. Because if you go into politics for thanks, then you're going in for the wrong reason. So, but like with that said, at the local level, I mean, it is so tangible where it's like, thank you for fixing that pothole on my street. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it can really be that local and that tangible. And so that's really, and I've had the opportunity to serve at, local, state, and federal government levels. And so that's something that you get a chance to see that difference. But, the great thing is you can actually see the difference in the numbers that bear out, in like macro numbers that, the government reports out with some of the changes that you make. So it's really, I think that making a difference has always been something that has been important to me. Like I want to make a positive impact on the planet, on people, on our society, and that's just always been a motivating factor for me.
So when you were in politics, I want to ask this question because a lot of us in the nonprofit sector have to address people who are in politics to get things done. When you're on that other side of that equation, how did it make you feel, and how did you react when organizations came into you saying, Mark, we could really use your help?
Yeah, well, I think that having that experience on the other side of the desk has made my current work like all the more valuable, because I kind of know, what it's like being on the other side of that desk. And so, yeah, I think that, as, when you're in politics, when you're an elected official and you're serving the people, I think that, one of the things that's part of the job is listening to the people and listening to organizations, and included in that, of course, our nonprofits. Our nonprofit sector is some of our, most impressive experts in the country on like how to solve problems. And so I think listening to those folks is critically important, because that is really, whether it be, a charitable nonprofit having to do with, some sort of social problem or social issue that needs to be solved, or, a 501c6 nonprofit, like an association or a trade association or a professional organization that is looking for like improvements in their field, that is going to make a positive impact on consumers. And so there's a lot of expertise out there in the nonprofit sector, and as an elected official, I recognized early on that we can lean on that expertise to try to better our country.
Yeah. So now you're on the other side of the table, and as you mentioned, it's kind of helped you do this job a little bit better. How so?
Yeah, well, first, I think there's a little bit of street cred involved, right? So now all of a sudden when I'm on the other side, I sort of know what they've been through. I sort of know what's going on, whether it's an elected official I'm talking to or one of their staff members. I sort of, can, if I once in a while I'll just drop, oh, I, did this, or when I'm being introduced, oh, he was an elected official and did this and that, and they're like, oh, okay, so it's like, there's already like a common language, if you will, you know what I'm saying, where there's a little bit of more ease in the room, because I've been through it. I know what they're going through. I know exactly all the different demands that they have and competing demands and what they're looking for from me, and how I can help them do their job better, and at the same time, hopefully, we have some goals in common that we can accomplish together. And so, that alone is like a huge help. But, just from a pragmatic standpoint, I do kind of know what they're looking for, that they want to make sure that they're getting a balanced view, that, I'm sort of giving them not only my point of view, but also, any guardrails or any that they need to look out for. And so that's something, or third rails, I should say, that they should be looking out for. So that way, like, I'm, trying to also make sure that, they understand, what, not only policy-wise, but politically, what I'm asking them to do means to them.
Now that you're on this other side, I also wanted to just ask you about how you see the difference between the two. So both are obviously concerned about improving, solving problems, addressing the concerns of people and institutions. What have you seen now that is maybe somewhat different between the different roles that you've had, both in government and now in nonprofit?
I feel like when I was elected, bipartisanship was not a dirty word, and it feels like today it is, and that's a shame, because so many things can get done if both parties can work together. But when extremes from parties are sort of urging not to compromise on anything, and we saw it recently, with the border wall deal, that we actually had compromise in Congress, and then it sort of fell apart because it became a political issue. That can be problematic, and that's really tough, because at that point you're governing, and this is not new, but you're governing on a 2-year election cycle, and then everything becomes a political football and not a solution. And so that's something that I feel like has gotten worse. I feel like it started to drift in the 90s this way. I go back to, like, if you look back in history and you look at somebody like Tip O'Neill from my native home state, who like used to play poker with, he was a Democratic Speaker of the House, played poker with Republicans, socialized with them. And so one of the things that, he really felt was important that we can disagree when we're on the chamber floor, but outside of the chambers, let's like socialize, get together, because we want to be able to solve problems for the country together. And it's going to take both parties to do that. And I feel like some of that's been lost, starting probably in the 90s. There's been an erosion of that, where it's more about like what's best for the next election, not necessarily what's best for the country. And that can be problematic.
Well, now that you're in the nonprofit world, you have some other opportunities, though, especially given that your work extends literally across the country. And, so much of our society, as you mentioned, is subjected to this polarization and this toxic, you're either this or that. It would seem to me that the work you're doing has a common interest to it. And you have this great opportunity through your work to maybe link people of different communities and backgrounds to this common mission of simply beautifying our roads. And let's get utilities buried. Let's come up with reasonable policies for redevelopment, although I guess that's a pretty tricky one. But you have some opportunities, I think. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Scenic America, where I've been the president and CEO at Scenic America for 7.5 years, really proud of the work we do. And it really is a bipartisan organization. Our mission is to preserve and enhance the visual character and scenic beauty of our country. And so, we love parks and open space. We love scenic byways. We don't like billboards. We'd like to see overhead wires go underground, and we'd like to see good principles in placemaking across the country. So those are the issues, the core issues that we really work on. And I'm really excited that, basically we are advocating that every American should have the opportunity to live, work, and play in a beautiful place, right? And so that's really important because it's good for mental health. It's good for physical health. Like, if people live in a neighborhood that's beautiful, they're going to get out more often, and they're going to walk, or they'll run, or, they'll exercise more is the point. Whereas if like you live in an area that, is kind of run down, not so great, you're not going to want to be outside as much. And everybody has this opportunity. We can get this done. And we do tend to have, we are a very bipartisan organization because honestly, at the end of the day, who wouldn't be in favor of beautiful, a beautiful America?
Maybe
to
people
live, work,
who like
and play.
billboards.
Well, yes. Okay. So, yes, perhaps the billboard industry they don't like us, but we've also been incredibly effective. Over the last 4 years, there are 20,000 fewer billboards in the country. And that's, of course, due to a lot of the work we're doing. So we're really appreciate that. And, the irony is there would be no billboard industry if not for the public investment in the road and in the infrastructure, right? So I think it's reasonable that we have certain limitations on how that does get monetized, considering it all stems from the public sector investment.
But that's really interesting, though, on the billboard thing. Do you have like a number or some kind of equation that you put toward You're not saying let's eliminate all billboards. You're saying let's do it in a more judicious way, or a way that takes into account the need to keep some places free of that. What is your approach to that?
Well, it really depends on the area. Like there are 4 states that have an out and out ban on billboards.
Really?
Yes.
Wow,
there are 4 states where you will not find a single billboard.
Wow.
And that surprises a lot of people because a lot of people just sort of assume it's a part of life, and it doesn't have to be a part of life. And so Those four states are Vermont, Maine, Alaska, and Hawaii. All states known for their scenic beauty, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there is, you talk about an equation, that is like part of an equation of how to make your community more beautiful is to not have billboards. Now, we're not suggesting that there shouldn't be billboards in Times Square,
Right.
because that's actually quite an
Part of
appropriate
your
place
character. Yeah.
for billboards. It's part of the character, as you just said, Art. And that to us is like the most important thing is what's the context? What
Yeah.
is the character of the community? What is the context? And we want to make sure that every solution we come up with is context sensitive. So, it makes sense to have billboards in not Times Square, just like it makes sense to have, neon flashy videos in the Vegas Strip. Just like, it makes sense to have none of those things in a national park or adjacent to a national park, you know? And so that's really what it is we're looking for. Just by the way, similarly in a residential neighborhood, you wouldn't want those things either.
Absolutely.
And so that's really what it comes down to is the context.
Yeah. It makes me think about the future of these things because I can imagine one day, I used to think about one day we could probably put on a pair of glasses and just kind of know visually through these glasses where we are and who's advertising these particular things just in our glasses. And if we didn't want to see that, we could flip them off too.
Right.
So
And
that's an electronic alternative, digital alternative to billboards could be kind of interesting too, I guess.
well, you're right. I think that, the truth is, as we're looking at the evolution of advertising,
Yeah.
this, device gives us,
Yeah.
a lot more power and a lot more potential for advertisers in that, when you want to know where something is, you don't go driving around looking for the nearest billboard.
Right.
You look it up on your phone and you go and find it. So that's something that's really, it's part of the evolution of how we do business, how we conduct ourselves, and I think is an evolution in advertising.
Okay, so enough about billboards. You're doing a lot of other good work too, and I'm particularly drawn to this idea that we can get utilities buried.
Yeah,
Um, Although they seem like massive infrastructure projects,
they are.
and it would take a lot of public support to kind of make those things happen. So what's the arguments that you make to our legislatures to get that kind of work done?
Yeah, so we were lucky in that I say lucky. We did a lot of hard work, and in getting several $billion set aside in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, to help with trying to make sure we make our utility grid resilient. So resilience is something that's really important. And we talk about our a lot of the work around undergrounding utility wires in terms of resilience and in terms of safety. So look, I think everybody knows about all the wildfires that have happened
Yeah.
in the West and particularly in California, and some of this was caused by utility wires that had arcing electricity that jump to a tree and then the wildfire starts. And
Yeah.
so that's really something that is critical. And what's important is that we want to get as many of these wires underground. For safety. There's obviously there's the fire safety reason. There's also the resiliency. I mean, think about when the power goes out in whether it's a wildfire or a snowstorm or a hurricane or a tornado, like you name the natural disaster, your part of the country has it, right? And so ice storms, I mean, you name it, something's going to make the power go out at some point, right? And think about it if all of a sudden we lived in a country where we didn't have to have the power go out when all of these things happen. Think of the lives that would be saved.
Yeah.
Through the power not going out, whether you're in extreme heat and need that air conditioning to keep running, or you're in a hospital that obviously there's backup generators and things like that, but they get overtaxed when the power goes out as well. Their infrastructure, and there's a natural disaster, and so think of all these things that go into potentially having the power go out, and it's really scary. But also, and this is sort of a less thought of thing. Just think about car accidents with cars running into poles that don't need to be there. You know, and so all of a sudden, when you think of all the different ways that these become safety issues, having these wires underground, it's better for everybody. It's better for consumers. The economic downtime that happens, when the power goes out, the economy basically stops, for wherever the power is out for. Just think of the trillions of dollars in lost economic activity when the power goes out. And so that's what we need to start thinking about, is the opportunity cost of losing when the power goes out. And also all these other, costs, whether it be the cost of those car accidents, the cost of, the lives lost, which is terrible, and all of those things. And so if we care about safety, if we care about the resiliency of our grid, and we care about, trying to make sure we protect our economy from these catastrophes, then we're going to want to get these wires underground. And so that's something that's really important. And we have a good amount of momentum on this issue now that I'm really, proud of the work we're doing there.
On the issue of redevelopment or development, I guess I should say, I know you're working on that too.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that communities are facing nowadays? I can tell you one that I'm facing, in my little neighborhood.
Sure.
We have these farms around us that are, now being developed, and some of us are not too thrilled about that because we'd rather have it rural and bucolic. But we also recognize that there's a challenge that people have getting housing, and especially if it's low income, you can't really find enough of it. So there's this real debate, I guess, we have in how we develop responsibly, right? What are some of the issues that you're confronting now, and how are you beginning to address some of that?
I think that's when we talk about placemaking and having good principles in placemaking, that's really what that comes down to. So I'll give you like a great, case study for that. The town of Capitol Heights, Maryland, where I live, there is a main street called Central Avenue, which, by the way, Capitol Heights is directly east of Washington, D.C. Yeah. So if you were to take East Capitol Street and keep going east, it would become Central Avenue. For the listeners who don't know the D.C. area. Yeah. But Central Avenue is like not in great shape. I mean, it's kind of blighted. It's kind of ugly. There's these large utility poles lining it that really make it seem ominous. The development is kind of old and a little bit decrepit. And so there needs to be a revitalization. Now we have opportunities here in Capitol Heights because we have the Blue Line, and that's something that can really serve as an economic catalyst. And so when we look at a place like Capitol Heights, what we want to do is start, investing in things like, development around the metro stops and also development along Central Avenue. That's going to be like the anchor for this area economically. And so what that means is Capitol Heights can be both a part of the solution for the housing crisis in the DC region, and at the same time can use that to better its own our own economic situation. So one of the things that in our area would make sense is sort of dense high-rise housing. Let's say 7, 8 stories, something like that, where along Central Avenue, especially along like major corners and intersections, and also especially near the metro, because we want to make this a vibrant, walkable community. And that means you're going to want to be able to walk to the metro. You're going to want to be able to walk to, supermarkets and, restaurants and sort of everything like that. So that way, that's how you start to get the vibrancy of a community going. Is you need to invest in things like that. And so for a place like Capitol Heights, that's where that housing should be going, is making sure that we have that developed in a responsible way, that makes sense. Now, it's not easy to do that, and you need a lot of coordination from a lot of different players, including, state government, local government, No doubt federal government would be pitching in some funding to it. You also need the neighbors bought in, right? Because not everybody necessarily thinks that like having um, apartment building or condominium is like a good idea. But when you start saying to them, well, would you like a supermarket in your neighborhood? And they're like, oh yeah, I mean, we desperately need a supermarket. I said, well, this is the type of development that's going to attract a supermarket as well. And so once we start talking about it like that, in terms of like, we're trying to make this community better, then all of a sudden you start to see buy-in, because it's not so much about, a big bad apartment building. And you want to make sure, by the way, it's a mix of like affordable and also market rate. So that way, there's accessibility to folks, but at the same time, there's like a higher investment. You want diversity of income, coming into a neighborhood. And so there's all sorts of things that go into this that probably, are more economically focused than scenic focused in many ways. But at the same time, if you have a beautiful development, you're going to attract, people that are going to want to come in and invest in your community. And that's something that at the end of the day is the most important thing. And that's why Scenic America is so much about quality of life. And so that's really, how we look at projects like that in order to develop an area. And Scenic America is a little different from some environmental organizations in that we're not opposed to development. We're opposed to bad development, right? So we don't, if that same busy intersection where we'd like to see the high-rise condo, do not put a gas station on that corner, because that's not going to help you, right? That's just a terrible use of land. I'm not saying you can't have a gas station somewhere, but don't put it on that prominent corner, because that's where you need to put your high-rise residential. And hopefully have mixed use where you have retail on the bottom. Maybe you do have a supermarket mixed in there with that as well. So, but yeah, that's how we look at it.
Fantastic. Well, I'm smiling partly because it seems that you're getting so much joy out of this. Not just interview, of course, but the work that you
Well, Art, this is the best. This has been the highlight of my day, Art.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But not everything we do gives us that much fun. But I'm looking at you and I'm just saying, wow, he's really into this. He's a guy who's been in politics and he's been a state legislature. And I have a friend who's a state senator. He loves it too, but his wife is sometimes, we got people coming to our door at the middle of the night. I don't know if I'm really cool with that. But, you're doing something now that it really feels like it's bringing you a lot of satisfaction. It's something that you're obviously good at. You're obviously well informed and you believe in it. And was this something that came to you kind of serendipitously, or was this like a planned thing? How did you end up here?
That's kind of an interesting story that also goes back to my childhood.
Okay.
And so, when I was always been very service oriented. I was president of the student council in high school, and really wanted to always like be service oriented. And so when I was a teenager, I joined this local nonprofit in my hometown, and it was an environmental nonprofit. And one of the main things they worked on was the town's sign ordinance. And trying to tighten up so that way, like, there weren't too many, like, ugly signs and stuff like that. Yeah. And so that was like the first nonprofit board I ever served on, way back, when. And now bring it forward, I feel like that my current job is a full circle moment to that, where I'm working on sign ordinances, across the country. So it's been really one of those full circle moments that, I feel like I've been preparing for this job my whole life, where, between that experience and, of course, my, experience in politics and elected life and nonprofit leadership and management, like, that they were all leading to this moment. So it's funny, I would not change my path one bit. I've learned so much every stop along the way, and it just seems like they all sort of every experience builds on the next.
Well, Mark, look, I want to thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for joining the show and giving us a bit about you and the work that you're doing. I'm going to have to call you about what's happening in our community and just get you.
That's fine. That's
I'll
fine.
give you a call and just see what insight I can get from you on your work and
Oh, of
how we
course.
can deal with what we're doing here. But
And
go ahead.
and
No.
I was going to say to your state senator friend,
Yeah.
you know, the good news is most I was single most of the time I was elected,
Uh-huh.
so
Okay.
that definitely, because you bring your family into this, they didn't ask for it, right?
Right.
So that's one of the pieces here that's critical. But also, what I find interesting, or a funny story, I remember I was in the House. I want to say it was might have been, I think it was my first term, and I'm asleep, and all of a sudden my phone rings at 6 in the morning, or maybe even 5 in the morning, and my phone rings, and this woman says, "Yes, I'm having a problem with X, Y, and Z, and I was hoping you could help me, and I wanted to catch you before you got to work."
Wow.
And I remember thinking, "Lady, you are my work." But that's that's what it is, and so
What it
you
is.
got to meet people where they are. But yeah,
Yeah.
but that's it's a 24/7 job, and I'm just going to say that I cherish my time in politics, but I love being where I am now. So
That's great.
yeah.
Oh, great. Well, listen, to everyone who's listening to this for the first time, this is the Heart of Giving podcast, and you've been listening to Mark Falzone, who is the CEO of Scenic America. And if you want to, you can subscribe to this podcast. I hope you do. We come out with a new episode every week, and I hope you will subscribe and check us out as we issue these new episodes. And if you want to support the podcast, you can do that by going to give.org, which is the website of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance, which also powers the Heart of Giving podcast. So I thank you again for listening, and I hope we see you back here next week.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.